Well, thank you very much, and I think we're off to a great start, so I want to thank everyone that's being here today, and I particularly want to thank Northrop Grumman for sponsoring today's meal, and thank you all for being here with us this week here in San Diego. But before we continue the program, I'd like to note a recent loss to the West family, and that was Ray Moriarty, the president of Paradise Expo Services and a partner with AFCEA and the Naval Institute on the West Conference for many years, and he's passed away on December 28th. Ray served in the Air Force during the Vietnam War, was a leader in exhibitions and events field, and touched many of the lives throughout the San Diego area with his charitable contributions and various activities. He was also our colleague and our friend, and he will be missed. So I'll just take a brief minute here to think about Ray and his family as we go through this event. Again, for those of you who haven't had an opportunity, there's a membership booth outside for both AFCEA, United States Naval Institute, and we would welcome your joining us and supporting us as we go forward out here. So when you have an opportunity, the booths are out front. One thing that I'd like to point out in conjunction with this event that is on the 1st of March, back in the greater Washington area in the Chantilly, there will be the AFCEA is hosting a Foreign Naval and Maritime Threat Symposium, and you'll hear more about that later on, but that symposium is going to be held at the top secret SCI level. So it'll give you a good opportunity to get some of the insights that you might not ordinarily get about the world as it is, not necessarily the world we wish it was as we move forward here. Today's guest speaker is a distinguished officer who has squarely tackled all the tough jobs in the Navy, or just about all the tough jobs. He's had an immense amount of time in command. He has shouldered responsibility willingly and ably. He had extensive service in the Pacific to include the J-3 Operations Officer for the United States Pacific Command, Commander of the 7th Fleet, and now the Pacific Fleet Commander. One of the things that when you listen to the Deputy Secretary this morning, and if you've had an opportunity to look at the National Military Strategy, you'll notice that it focuses on re-emerging threats such as Russia and China. It talks about North Korea and Iran, and it also talks about rogue regimes, and talks about terrorist, transnational criminal threats. Let me tell you, the gentleman who's about to address you has responsibilities for 4 of those 5, and so he's got a full plate, and there's no one more able to take on that responsibility than the gentleman that I'm about to welcome up here today. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm now honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Admiral Scott Swift, Commander of the United States Pacific Fleet.
Hey, it's great to be here back at West again. Bob, thanks for the kind introduction and the leadership of AFCEA here, and Pete, having USN here, the great support that you continue to provide those of us that continue to wear the uniform that you took off. It seems like just yesterday. It's great to be back here. I have a few comments that I'm going to make, and whether it tees up a dialogue or questions is not all that relevant. What is relevant are those questions and comment statements that you may have on your mind. So these forums like this are extremely valuable, and I commend the entire West organization for bringing together government, industry, and the military to have a broad discussion, not only of the challenges that we face, but collectively how we can get after those challenges. So I want to frame my comments in 2 points. One is the mindset of readiness, and the other is the resourcing of readiness. And I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the mindset of readiness. And the example I'm going to share really came to the fore in my mind just having been here in San Diego, back in San Diego. So I arrived on, I think it was Friday for the christening of Omaha, Saturday morning. And it was interesting the number of people that were talking about the missile alert that occurred in Hawaii. It's interesting, the concept, and this is in the idea of the mindset of readiness. And the different perspective that people were sharing with me here in San Diego compared to the perspective that people had in Hawaii. Now, I happened to be driving around to the west shore of Oahu with my wife, and we were going to go for a hike out to Kaina Point. Great place to visit. And the road ends where the trail starts there. The road used to go all the way around the island, but it stops there at Kaina Beach. And so as we stopped, my wife got a text. And most texts I don't pay attention to, but this one got her attention. And so the text was that there was a missile inbound, and it was not a drill or not an alert. You all have know the story behind it. And so the first thing she did is, before I knew what the text was, she had a quizzical look at me, and what I didn't realize, she was assessing my reaction to what she was about ready to tell me. And her reaction was going to be based on my reaction. But before she could tell me, my phone went off, and I received the same text. And so my first reaction was frustration, which is probably unlike anybody else's reaction on the island at the time, because I know enough about the process that I would have received a phone call sometime before the text was launched that would have precipitated the text being launched. So try to explain that to my beautiful wife, Trish, when she's convinced that anything you get in a text has to be true. So it was interesting. So I said, look, let this thing play out. If it's real, there's nothing we can do about it. That was a wrong thing to say. A little bit of coaching going on. I meant nothing she or I could do about it. There's plenty of other things that the Joint Force is prepared to do out there. So we continued on with a hike, and she was spending, usually we look across the sea at the surf, it's a beautiful trail, and every once in a while she'd be looking up at the sky, and I said, what are you still worried about? She goes, yeah, I just wondered what it would look like as it was coming down. So a bit of morbidity that was in this as well. But the story behind this is really where the comedians went. And so there was some comedic license that was taken with this. And what was interesting was the comments of the people in Hawaii. And they did not think it was funny at all, the comedy part of it. And they took real exception, using words like it's irresponsible to try to turn an event like this into a humorous event. Now, it's a completely different perspective as you get further and further away from Hawaii. And there was concern here as well as far as the broader perspective of what that impact, if it was an attack on Hawaii, what does that mean to us in San Diego? What does that mean to us in the Midwest? And what this gets to is the mindset of readiness. So within the people of Hawaii, there's this fear that had been in the back of their minds because of all the rhetoric coming out of North Korea. There's a robust discussion about Aegis ashore and capability to defend Hawaii. Do we use ground-based interceptors? It's an item of discussion, certainly with the governor and with the state legislator. But it was this mindset of readiness that struck me, which is why I've begun talking about this. And then if you look at the Facebook pages, so there's a spouse page on Makalapa compound where my wife and I live. And this gets to the funding of readiness. So there were families that were asking the question, well, where do we go and what do we do? You know, the basics that old people like me grew up with, duck and cover, and you know, you had your supply of survival food and equipment. None of those readiness actions had been funded by the individual citizens of Hawaii, because it was this sense of this can't be real, and all of a sudden it was very real to them in a text, and now they were reacting. That's not where we can afford to be as a nation. So when I think in terms of readiness, I think in terms of the differences between whether we fund efficiency or we fund effectiveness. So we have to be efficient in what we do with taxpayers' dollars. But at the same time, as a military, we have to be effective as well. So I want to expand on that thought just a little bit. We have to be prepared with a mindset based on the reality as we see him in the military. And we have to respond with our best military advice as how to resource that readiness mindset. You know, Admiral Harris made the comment, I'm paraphrasing him, but he said as his role in PACOM, he has to imagine the unimaginable and assume that it's going to come true. You know, it's like I was sharing a discussion at the table here, and I made the comment, I've used this before as an example, so let me see a little audience participation. How many people here own homes? Show of hands. Okay, now raise your hand if you do not have fire insurance. So all you people that own homes, you have fire insurance? How many people think that your house is going to burn down this week? No one? How about in the next month? In the next year? What are you wasting all your money for? Why do you have homeowners fires insurance if you don't think your house is going to burn down? That's our responsibility. We need to take that same responsible approach, because the risk may be low, but the consequences are so high if you lose that house. And the fire department may not be able to respond in time to put that fire out however it gets generated. That's how we need to think in terms about this readiness mindset and how do we resource that readiness. And it goes to Admiral Harris's point about imagining the unimaginable and then making sure that we're prepared for that. You have to view, in my perspective, you have to view readiness through the filter, the lens of combat operations. So I usually talk in terms of phase 2 operations, but for a broader audience, in the terms of combat operations. The challenge that we have is that, as I would imagine, I didn't read DepSecDef's comments, but it's certainly captured well, I would suggest, and I think I might be so bold to say Admiral Harris would feel the same way as the PACOM commander, that it's difficult to find room to quibble with the national security strategy that was just published or the national defense strategy. It's been the perspective of Admiral Harris for the last 3 years, and certainly my perspective as well, that the pacing challenge that we face in the Pacific is China. I would suggest globally, but I certainly would say on China. And just as we don't expect our homes to burn down, the low probability that would happen, we have to plan for that consequence in a measured kind of way, which is fire insurance. Likewise, as Admiral Harris said, we have to imagine the unimaginable, even though it may be low probability, it's got such a high consequence. If it came to a military conflict between two great powers, the consequences are going to be significant. So I want to expand on that idea in the context of being mentally focused on readiness. As I mentioned, it's reflected in the national security strategy. It's reflected in the national defense strategy. There is a great power competition that has returned to the Indo-Pacific that we live in. And what's at stake is the challenge of the rules-based order that has ensured the stability of the region since the end of World War II. And this rules-based order, another discussion that we had at the table, this rules-based order was negotiated with winners and losers that came out of that conflict. And the result of that negotiation is exactly that rules-based order. What's more important is that not only did we get the rules-based order, but the institutions were established to resolve differences in the application of that rules-based order. What's happening is, with respect to China and others as well, is they're challenging that rules-based order. They're applying national law in international space, displacing the sovereignty of other nations. And they're doing it across the whole of government. It's not just, so the rebalance, people have criticized the rebalance because it was too focused on the M and the dime fill. It was the military piece. And there wasn't enough diplomacy, although I would argue that our State Department colleagues had done a fantastic job. Certainly my experience as a 7th Fleet commander and the 3 years as a Pacific Fleet commander, the ambassadors throughout the region, the key leaders back at State in the Pacific with responsibilities in the Pacific were fantastic partners. But we weren't as engaged, resource-focused on the diplomatic side as we were on the military side. And largely absent on the information domain, the economic domain, the financial domain, the intelligence domain, and the legal domain. But we're facing competition across all those domains that are in play all the time. And in fact, there's a term for it that I heard recently by a senior member in the government that talked about economic coercion, and that term resonated with me. If you look at the pressure that's being brought on countries from a business perspective for diplomatic or governmental decisions that they're making, it's extraordinary. And I think the right term to describe this is revanchist powers. That powers that want to go back and correct perceived wrongs that have occurred more than 100, 150 years ago. And to move forward in a positive way, to continue the incredible growth that we've enjoyed throughout the Pacific, is going to be very difficult if we keep coming back to that place in history. And that stability that we've enjoyed since the end of World War II, because of that rules-based order, has been the foundation on which the prosperity that has been enjoyed across the region. And that prosperity is that rising tide of prosperity has raised all boats, all countries, equally. Even some of those countries that are seeking to change that rule set now. There's no reluctance on the part of many to apply national power in that international space, and to use threat-filled propaganda to tell people that if you take this action, this is what the result will be. Whether it's a military response, an economic response, a diplomatic response, there was coercion involved in that, and it's certainly commercial intimidations and operations just below the threshold of war designed to isolate and coerce neighbors into submission on the global stage. And there's multiple examples that you can see that occur just on the front page of any newspaper around the globe. And it's what strikes me as China's commitment to actions to apply, then enforce their national laws in that international space that is so compelling, displacing the sovereignty of others. So with that as a background, when I think in terms of the readiness of the Pacific Fleet, what I try to inject into the sailors of the Pacific Fleet is the mindset of readiness. We don't want to find ourselves in the position where if our fears become reality, we haven't put the mechanisms in place to address those fears. We don't want to be where we are, and I know the governor is in the same place, and others, leaders in Hawaii. Certainly on the military side, we've been in this place for a while, where we're surprised with a text that comes across a phone. that suggest what your worst fears are now reality, and the first question that you ask is, what do we do, as opposed to execute the plan. That's where we need to be, certainly as a military. That's where we need to be as a Navy. I made the comment in one of the interviews I did on Saturday after the Omaha christening is that no disparagement meant towards the other services, but the Navy's not a garrison force. And we have, the Navy's charge has been to look after the U.S. national interest at the leading edge of that interest, forward, especially in those areas where it's being most challenged, especially in those areas where it's being challenged by peer competitors that have the power, that have the desire to change that policy. And we have to do it on behalf of others that don't have the power to stand up to those forces. We have to compete in that competition. Competition isn't a bad thing, and competition doesn't necessarily mean conflict. We shouldn't approach this in a foregone conclusion that we're on a path to conflict. I disagree with those that characterize the friction and tensions that occur between the United States and competitors out there, that we're on this path to war, we're on the path to conflict. It's just we haven't seen this peer competition before. So it's not new to us as a nation, but it's new to us as individuals, because most of us haven't experienced this before. But anytime you enter a competition, you want to enter that competition from a position of strength. And the first strength that you need to have is mental strength, that mindset of readiness, and why that readiness is so critical. And you have to think of it in terms at the strategic level first, not at the tactical level. And after you've thought about the strategic level and you've developed a strategy of how you want to apply your national power to continue the global stability that we've enjoyed these last 70 years, the next step is to apply it at the operational level. So the strategy is developed at the strategic level, and then it's applied in meaningful ways at the operational level. That's where the application occurs across the whole of government, across the entire dime fill. And then once you've done that, with that overarching strategy, with that understanding of what you need to do at the operational level, then you can get to the tactical level training. And then the 140,000 sailors that report for duty every morning in the Pacific Fleet have a sense of purpose. They have a sense of understanding of what they're doing day in and day out has national consequence in a positive or negative sense, depending on what their actions are. And then you get to the second part of the discussion of funding that readiness. And we've gone down a path, the CNO is focused on this, certainly the SecDef is focused on this. We had the opportunity of SecDef traveling through PACOM the last couple of weeks, and then chairman shortly after him. And the other service chiefs as well are focused on this. We've got the defense committees in Congress that are acknowledging the impacts of sequestration, of BCA, and of continuing resolutions, and the insidious impact that it has on training. When people ask me about what are the impact of sequestration and the BCA, those other elements, they talk to me in the sense of what's happening today. I'm not worried about what the impacts are today. We'll work through that. I'm worried about what the impacts are 3 years from now. So we're suffering the effects of the government shutdown in 2013 today. We've disenfranchised, when I said 140,000 sailors, that includes all the civilian sailors that work for me, which is significant. We've disenfranchised those civilian sailors. When the government shuts down, they get no paycheck. They can't make mortgage payments. You don't write a letter to your mortgage company and saying, well, the government shut down, I didn't get a paycheck, I can't pay my mortgage. So the implications that we're facing today from a readiness perspective go all the way back to 2013. And the CR process that we're going through, we're going to continue to live with those challenges going forward in history, in certainly the next 3 years or so. And that's why CNO has been so clear in his testimony that one thing that we need to fix is get to a budget. so we can make plans and so industry can make plans. Industry has a heck of a time supporting us in uniform. I lost 3 ship avails this year. Could not do the maintenance because no company would bid on the contract because there's no guarantee there was any money behind it. So that's readiness that we canceled at InServe. That's readiness that we're going to have to make up at some point in the future. And it's not going to be with just a click of the fingers. Let me close on the point of on this point of funding readiness and how critical it is to think in terms of both force generation and force execution. So force generation is what we do with manning, equipping, maintaining the force. We generate readiness. The other side of the equation is force employment, is what we do as operators. Now, I've been very fortunate, other than 2 tours where I did requirements, I've been an operator my whole career. So Admiral Gortney unfortunately wasn't able to make it today, my understanding. So he's the father of the OFRP. You know, he's the guy that came up with a readiness kill chain. But he's the first one to tell you, I wish he was here, he's not a math major. I'm not a math major either. So he forgot that in an equation you need an equal sign and you need to balance something on the other side. So he was focused as FFC in the readiness kill chain. What is that kill chain that produces readiness from the time long lead material is bought until that part is on the shelf and ready to be installed? And then on the other side that's where I was working on. It's a wonderful place to be. And so he had a readiness kill chain. I was working on the kill readiness chain. I was an operator. So I was consuming all that readiness that Shortney was building. So the magic of naval power is the naval headquarters, the maritime headquarters. It's made up of the maritime headquarters side of the house. They generate readiness. And on the other side is the MOC, the operations center. That they consume readiness, force generation, force employment. We've got to get in balance. And it's critical for us in uniform to take this on and do it ourselves. Operating for operating's sake is not going to take us where we need to be in the future. I'm back to the strategy piece. Figure out the strategy, go describe what that looks like in an operational context, and then you align what you do tactically to support that, the operational design, and from there to support the strategy. So there's no easy answers out there. I don't see manna from heaven coming and we're going to have this incredible wealth that's going to be dropped on top of the military for us to fund the things that we need to do to go forward, which means more responsibility for us. We need to be realist about the world that we live in and then get after that. The problem set that we face that's presented to us based on those realities of where we are funding, balancing operations against our ability to generate that readiness. Let me stop at that point. I said I did want to get to your questions. Whether you've got specific questions on anything that I've commented on here today. Unfortunately, I missed the panel. I heard there was a great discussion with the TICOMs at their panel. So free target here. We got a microphone up front. Who's going to be that first individual that has the courage to throw the first stone? Can you feel the pressure building in the room? Who's going to be that first individual to step to the microphone? And
All right.
all right.
Good afternoon. Aye.
Go ahead, right over here.
Good afternoon, Admiral. Thank you for being here and great words that you gave us about readiness. I'm Everett Hayes. I'm a member of SUS Consulting. I wanted to ask you, sir, and this is a readiness question. I'm a black shoe sailor by trade, my life. So when we have the situation we have with the budget, when we see availabilities being canceled, we see collisions at sea, how do you help with the mindset of readiness on those sailors that are on the deck plate, the guys that are coming home and knowing that they have to get underway in a couple days or a week, how do you help them have a mindset of readiness that overcomes some of these obstacles and some of the constraints that they might feel given the current situation they see in the news or just what's going on their ship?
So I think the first thing that we need is an honest discussion and acknowledge the challenges that we have across the Navy, and I think that's what CNO is driving at. If you look at the board that the Undersecretary and the Vice CNO lead, the steering group that's underneath them, the working groups that are underneath them, what that does is it gets beyond, my concern is one of my concerns is with the CR, with the SECNAV's, SRR, that we're going to take a checklist or punch list approach. And in fact, Admiral Moran himself has spoken, as has the Undersecretary, said we need to move beyond that. We need to fix all those elements, each one of those issues, but there's an acknowledgement that if we fix each one of those issues, we will not have solved the problem. So I went back and I read the Belisle report. And I compared the Belisle report to the CR. And then I applied SECNAV's SRR to the CR. There's one other document that's out there. There's probably a couple of them. But I went to a document that Admiral Copeman wrote back in late 2012, and he called it the Vision 2025 memo. And it's classified confidential because of some of the data that he uses in it. But if you take those 4 documents and stack them on top of each other, I mean, there is almost, it's got to be 90% overlap over describing the challenges that we have today. In fact, Tom made some comments back in 12 about where we would be looking ahead at the projected 2015 budget. So what I've asked my staff to go back is look in the rearview mirror at 2015, compare that to what he suggested where we would be in 2015 from his 2012 perspective. You know, I think that will help inform us. So that's a way to say that there's a lot of new discovery that's occurred, but there's a lot of affirmation of comments that have been made for others. And this is the fact VCNO made the comment in January of last year when he said, before we buy more ships, build more ships, we need to fund the Navy that we have, to include manning. I got asked a question in a similar forum, if you had to fix one thing, what would it be? And I must admit, I'm not very proud of my response because my brain stopped and I thought, I would love to live in a world where there was one thing that fixed something. It just doesn't exist. You know, best rank I ever had was lieutenant. You know, there's a lot of people in here that would say that's the last rank that you had any competency in. But I knew my world as a lieutenant. You know, I knew my weapon system. You know, I think the same is true of a second-class petty officer. You know, if you want something done, give it to a lieutenant or give it to a second-class petty officer. If you give it to a lieutenant commander, well, so my story as a lieutenant, I was squared away. I came to work every day with my list of 7 things, and I was done by 10 o'clock. I was wicked squared away. And then I started thinking in terms about what was all screwed up with the Navy. You know, so I started my list of things that was all screwed up with the Navy. And I had a CO that told me, he said, you know, I don't need any more help identifying problems. I need help identifying solutions. So I had my list of solutions to all those things that were screwed up with the Navy. But I came to realize I was just too junior. If someday I could just be a 4-star, I could fix all these problems. And then I made lieutenant commander and realized it wasn't that easy. It's like when you make first-class petty officer, now you got to worry about the watch bill, you got to worry about all those other issues. You know, if I could just be chief, if I was a chief, I could make things happen. And then you make chief and you realize things are a little more complicated than what you thought they were as a first-class petty officer. What we're trying to do, what the CNO and the Secretary are doing is to institutionalize the solutions to the challenges that we face, recognizing that many of those solutions that we'd like to pursue is beyond our authority. You know, we can write a budget, but we don't fund that budget. Other people fund that budget. So we've got to get back into that balance of force generation and force execution. That's why VCNO said, before we go buy more ships, we need to pay for the Navy that we've already bought. I'm paraphrasing, those are my words, not necessarily his. And CNO has said the same thing. So, we're all about a 350-ship Navy. We've got to get there if we are going to continue to answer the demand signal that the nation is putting on us. But we've got to get there holistically. It's what Admiral Gortney talked about. When Admiral Gortney talked about the OFRP, he said the relevancy of the OFRP is going to be based on whether it's funded or not. So it's a great process. It's a great readiness tool. But we have to resource it. And then we have to resource operations based on the amount of readiness that we're able to generate. So we may have to do less. The Navy is a can-do organization. We're getting underway, we got a mission. Well, wait a minute. We need to take a look at our readiness to get underway. And that's tough for us to do, but that's the cultural approach. When we talk about cultural change, that's what we're talking about. But a great question, and a question that's on the minds of senior leadership. I know that consumes the discussion that I have with my four-star peers. Next week, we've got a meeting back in D.C. It's a week long, all the 4 stars, then the 3 4-stars, and then all the flag officers and SESs in the Navy to get after this specific challenge. Yeah, shipmate.
Good afternoon, sir. HM2 DeGuerra, Naval Hospital, Camp Pendleton, Emergency Department Assistant Leading Petty Officer and Assistant Command Fitness Leader. My question.
I'm wicked intimidated right now.
Oh, very good.
I wish I had as many plates spinning as you do.
Good to go, sir. My question deals with NAV Admin 304/17. It's the changes in the PRT requirements. Essentially, commands are no longer separating service members who fail 2 or more PRTs. I was curious as your opinion on that, and if there is anything in the works about that affecting deployability for our sailors who are failing those PRTs, whether they're still going to be deployable, or basically just your opinion on those members being able to maintain their contracts through their SOF to US.
Hey, it's a great question, and I gotta characterize it. The comment that I made before. I'm not a lieutenant. I'm not a second-class petty officer. So the challenge that I have, being where I am as the PAC Fleet Commander. All my commands that I've had the privilege of holding have been great, and the best rank I ever had was lieutenant. But the best command I ever had was an 05 command, because I knew all my sailors. I knew all their families. Husbands, wives, and kids. I knew what their aspirations were. I knew what their challenges were. I knew where they needed support. Around 250 people in the command. And my next command was Major Command. I had 2,500 sailors that were all up and down the West Coast. So the ability to reach out and touch sailors was a little more difficult. And now as a PAC Fleet Commander, this is a little bit larger audience than I normally speak to, but it's not uncommon to talk to 1,000 sailors at once. It's very uncommon to have, a back and forth one-on-one such as this. I think one of the most powerful statements that leaders can make is, I don't know. And we're not willing to make those statements. We think that, because I'm a 4-star, I've got to have all the answers. I already told you, I had all the answers when I was a lieutenant. So now I rely on my Fleet Master Chief, Honea, to stay in contact with the deck plate and keep me connected. All these people have melted away in my mind. This is a one-way back and forth conversation between the two of us. But look, we've got a manning challenge in the Navy. That's where CMP was coming from. So everything is on the table. So right now, if you take a look at, I won't go through all the math with you, but Milius is coming out to, any Milius sailors in here to put you on the spot? So Milius is getting ready to deploy and become an FD and FJ ship. Now, when she was designed with a little more than 300 sailors for her warfighting complement. She's down around 240 something now. If you take that in time-wise, so that ship was designed using a metric of a 70-hour work week for a sailor. She's up at 80-hour work week now per sailor. That's 10 hours. In fact, I think if the math right, it's over 13 hours difference if she was fully manned to the warfighting requirement. And there's reasons why we don't do that. Manning's going to go down. CMP's been clear about this. Admiral Davidson has been clear about this. Our manning is going to be less in this year than it was last year. It's going to be less in 19 than it was in 18. It's going to turn the corner in 18, and it's going to go up pretty steeply. But in 2020, at the end of 2020, we'll be back at the 2017 levels. So where we are with circadian rhythms, where we are with making sure that sailors are getting time to rest, it's critically important that we continue those efforts. But what's most important, remember the issue about if we had to fix one thing? I've got an answer for that now. Fix manning. So this is part of the issue to fix manning. We don't have the time, I don't think, to get it perfect. So in answer to your question, do I think the new admin is perfect? No. But I think what it replaced was much more imperfect as well. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. You know, Marines, you know, their PRT standards have to be very tight. Same if you're a soldier. Less so from a Navy perspective. I would even be open to going down kind of a rate-specific perspective. What's important, a broader term which is more important, is health of the fleet. So it's physical health, it's mental health, you know, emotional health, it's intellectual health. Are we providing the training that's necessary for you to be a success, not as a second-class petty officer, but as a first-class petty officer? Are we giving you the quality of life, the time off to pursue the things that you want to do to make you a whole person, to enable you to be a whole sailor as well, to more fully support the mission that we challenge? So I'm probably the wrong person to ask the question. I've got friends that love working out. I hate working out. I hate it with a passion. But the problem is I love to eat. So I think my natural body weight is around 300 pounds. I couldn't get through an escape scuttle. You don't want me the first one through in that situation. But I work out because I've got 15 minutes to make a first impression. And we judge people by how they look. So if I don't look physically fit, I'm at a detriment in the conversation that I want to have with you right away. And that's not fair, because everybody isn't built like I am. And they're still wonderful sailors. So the standards haven't changed. You know, you still need to be able to execute the physical elements of the mission, whether it's lifting a hatch, whether it's pulling a shipmate up through a scuttle, you know, whatever it may be. But I think CMP's got it exactly right, and obviously CNO approved it, that in this period where manning is more critical than the specific elements, you know, the physical elements of those sailors, relaxing those elements, I think, was the right approach to take. Long answer to an important question. It's not a question, it's a dialogue. So we need to continue this dialogue across the Navy, because we'll continue to tweak this as we go forward. CNO's committing CRs and BCAs and all the rest of that aside, when I talked about the projection about where we're going on manning, that's assuming that we have a budget. All bets are off if we don't have a budget. But hoping that we do get a budget, we're going to revisit, I'm confident, the PRT piece and tweak it, you know, back and forth until we do have it right. Thanks for that question.
Thank you, sir.
Who else has a question? In the back, right here, yeah.
Sir, Sidney Friedberg, Breaking Defense, evil media person. Let me ask, you mentioned two things I want to ask you to weave together. One is this readiness mindset that has to go down to every enlisted sailor. The other is this great power competition and preparing for the nightmare scenario. How are you changing training, exercises, schooling, so that everybody from, you know, the flags on down is getting demonstrably more ready for that nightmare scenario, so we're more likely to deter it from ever happening?
Well, first of all, I don't think you're evil. But I'll wait and see what you write after my comments before Actually, I'm kidding when I say that. You know, one of the things, we've all sworn an oath, those of us that have put the uniform on to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I think we all agree freedom of the press is a critical element of the democracy that we own. Look at how China pursues propaganda to their own people to remove those liberties. So I very much appreciate what you do and the commentary that you generate. So. So my answer is it starts with me. Some of the answer is the work that CMP is doing. Some of the answer is the work that Admiral Davidson is doing with Ready Relevant Learning. Some of the answer is the engagement that the TICOMs have, who are the executors of that ready, relevant learning. It's Bill Lesher's effort in the building to fund it. So there's a lot. Unfortunately, the conversation tends to get fuzzed up, but it starts with me. I was just talking with some innovator workshop that we do here in San Diego, and it happened to be this morning, so I went and talked to them. And there's a lot of, we're not a very innovative culture, the Navy, the military. We don't like change, even though I would say that our job description is to force change on others. They try to change us, we try to change them, and it's called combat. And what I told them when they were lamenting the challenge they face with instilling this embracing of innovation, because innovation is about taking risk. It's about learning through making mistakes. And that's not something that comes naturally to us anymore in our thinking. And so my comment to them is the same as my response to you, is that it starts with me. So I can't, as a lieutenant, I could just complain about these things and say I was too junior, but that doesn't work anymore. I can't blame, there's nobody senior to me to blame anymore other than my wife, and she's not very receptive to me blaming her for my challenges. So we've done a couple of things. You have to write, you have to think, you have to dialogue, as we did with HM2, and you have to write your thinking down and open it to critique and criticism. So there's a couple of documents, and you have to do it in different forums. So there's 4 documents that I've written at the classified level. One is a series of Swift signals that I sent to the fleet to engender the sense of reality of what we face as an operational fleet, the threat as I saw it. And the intent in writing those Swift signals is ultimately, I wanted to follow Hank Mustin's great example of writing fighting instructions for the Pacific Fleet. And so the Swift signals were meant to engender a dialogue with the deck plates. And from that dialogue, learn and then write the fighting instruction. What I found is the fleet was having a hard time bridging between those two. So we wrote another document called the Operational Design for Full Spectrum Superiority in the Pacific. It's kind of I would suggest the work that Admiral Roden did with distributed lethality was a subset of full spectrum superiority. It's what we talk about, all domain kind of warfare. How do we think about that? So I published the Swift signals, a series of messages. There's a couple more that I'll push out here in the not too distant future. We wrote the Design for Full Spectrum Superiority, and we've just published the fighting instructions. So that's what I've done, down and in at the tactical level. And then my thanks to Pete Daly and USN, and so I leveraged, Pete, shut your ears. So I leveraged Pete's leadership in what he has built Proceedings into to publish an article in Proceedings. Now, I'm going to bring some pressure on top of Pete because that's one of 3 articles that I submitted for publication. And I recognize the importance of the editorial board. So, and I'm not going to push, it doesn't matter whether you're a E1 or an O10, you got to get your articles through the editorial board, and rightfully so, because we've got to protect the institution of Proceedings from a reporting perspective. It's the veracity of speaking, giving a voice to anyone that wants to step to the microphone and share a view. It's filtered by the editorial board to make sure it's just not ranting. But there's 2 more articles that are coming out. Well, I shouldn't say that. Freudian slip. 2 other articles that I've submitted for consideration that will help expand this dialogue beyond the command, mission command, Mastering the Art of C2 article that was just published in Proceedings this month. So that's kind of my answer to you, is that we just can't take a look at this as someone else's problem to solve. If you think it's a problem, step up. You need to solve it. And even if you're not sure quite how to solve it, you need to take a step forward and do what you can to make a difference wherever you are. And I'm hopeful that there's enough people that are influenced by, I've kind of lived by that for, throughout the 40 plus years that I've been in the Navy. I hope there's enough people that have influenced by that approach that they'll continue on this effort, as I was inspired by Admiral Willard, learning at his knee about command and control. So let me take this question, and then how am I doing for time, Pete? One more question, so go ahead.
Good afternoon, Admiral. Iwan Milos, USS John P. Murtha. The question is, with the missile alert in Hawaii and then the recent failure for Aegis Ashore on Barking Sands, does the Navy have a way forward with shore-based defense of our coasts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is my personal opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of the CNO or the Secretary of Navy. So one thing I would say, well, first of all, we need to be careful about expanding our mission set. So the first discussion that I have with Admiral Harris, for Aegis Ashore, do we really need sailors manning something that doesn't get underway? Shouldn't sailors be at sea? So it's the strategic piece. So we need to have the strategic dialogue first. Now, if that means shore duty for Aegis sailors that are on cruisers and DDGs, now I may be interested in that. That may be a model that I'm interested in. And I haven't had this discussion with CNO or the Secretary, so this is my thoughts in response to your question. I want to give them maneuver space to make their own conclusions in the way forward. Aegis Ashore is a great capability. We hosted the Japanese defense minister in Barking Sands, a critical national strategic asset. It's incredible the development work that we do there in partnership with industry. From a training perspective, what we do to train ships, and we have a Aegis Ashore training facility there, if you will, that we really use for testing missiles and radars more than it's really not a good physical location for the defense of Hawaii. But Japan is pursuing Aegis Ashore. We've got it in Romania, we've got it in other places. So the technology is there and the concept works. It's what's the burden to support it? How are we going to man it? How are we going to fund it if it's going to come out of Navy funding lines? And my basic view is, other than shore duty, sailors should be at sea. So we need to walk through that piece. Let me talk about the recent failure that we had with SM3. And so it's important. One of the things that we need to get through with innovation is we can criticize ideas without criticizing individuals. It's hard to do because we take ownership of our ideas. So I've got these brilliant ideas, and if someone criticizes them on my staff, I rip their heads off because they obviously don't get it. I keep bringing my wife up. My wife's on an airplane right now, so I know she's not aware of any of this that's being said, and my staff, I'm confident, won't appraise her of me using her in vain. She's the one that challenges me all the time, which is actually one of the reasons why our relationship is as strong as it is. But here's my critique. I would suggest that that was not a failure. It was a learning event. If we treat it as a failure, we're not going to learn from it. So I'm not going to go into the technical details. I'll leave that to MDA and that great team to talk about that. But I can tell you I'm highly confident in the mechanism of that failure, and we're going to fix that. It's what we were testing was actually validated in that test. We needed the rocket motor to continue to function, to get to the end game, so we could say with confidence that we've got that right. But that's what innovation is all about. Where we are with defense of the homeland, with missile defense, is at the leading edge of technology. And we've got North Korea that's pushing that leading edge even further ahead than what it would be occurring otherwise, which makes it very challenging for us to make sure we're pacing that threat as we go forward. But suffice it to say, with our joint partners, with our air defenders that run Patriot batteries out there, what we've got with THAAD batteries, what we've got with TPY-2s, what we've got with ground-based interceptors on the Air Force side, what we've got with SBX out there on station in the middle of the Pacific. You know, we have a robust capability to defend the United States against a one-off threat like North Korea or a more significant threat from a more advanced potential competitor out there. So I have a sense of confidence of where we are in missile defense. Unfortunately, and this is a challenge for the President, it's a challenge for Secretary of Defense, for the Chairman, we can't tell you why we're so confident, because it's all classified. If we shared the reason of our confidence, then we would reduce our overmatch that we have with some of these threats. That answer your question?
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. All right, I'll thank you once again, Bob, for the great opportunity to share some thoughts. It's great to see so many friends here. Used to be they were all in uniform. Now most of them are wearing coats and ties. Maybe that's a hint for me to step off the stage here. But it's been great being back here in San Diego to share some thoughts with you. Thanks very much.
Admiral. Admiral Swift, again, thank you very much. Great way to start off talking about effectiveness versus efficiency. And we got the risk versus consequence challenge as well. And again, appreciate the candor with which you address the challenges that are out there that you're dealing with, and your candor with the threats as you see them in an unclassed manner anyway from this part of the world. And I think we all need to understand that this is a rough neighborhood out here. It's getting rougher, and we want to thank you and the men and women of the Pacific Fleet for everything you do on a daily basis to keep us safe. So on behalf of AFCEA and the United States Naval Institute, and I want to present you this book, Great Powers, Grand Strategies, The New Game in the South China Sea. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it very much. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for attending the Luncheon Keynote. We now move into a break in the exhibit hall.